Well, hi everyone. I'm John Retlin with a real honest rant about the pros and cons of cinematic wrestling. Credit to I'm Valena on Twitter for the suggestion here. And what inspired me was the fact that WWE went batshit insane with all the cinematic wrestling by design and out of necessity because they wanted to, make WrestleMania rather. They wanted to make wrestling and WrestleMania more interesting. WrestleMania 36, by the way, which was too big for one night, they decided to go all cinematic and shit. And then they did it for Ciampa versus Gargano. Don't worry, I will get to that here in a bit, though. If you want to know my full thoughts on that match, check out my most recent NXT review. Just check out the NXT playlist. And unless, you're watching this like sometime in the future, then just scroll down for the NXT episode that took place right after WrestleMania 36. Again, too big for one night. So, cinematic wrestling is basically like trying to make mini movies and add music and add these dramatic effects and everything and just dress up matches that normally would just be basic. Trying to make, trying to be cinematic and everything. Trying to be a filmmaker with the guys of under a pro wrestling banner. And Vince McMahon has been desperate to do this shit for years. And he did it at WrestleMania 36. It also wasn't even close to the first time that anybody did anything like that. You go back to the Broken Universe stuff that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Sometime once I go down this list. And Matt Hardy, the broken gimmick, and just Jeff Hardy, all the stuff he did in Impact. I can't remember all the little ins and outs and stuff like that, but I remember that at least it got Impact some attention, and Matt seemed to enjoy it, Jeff seemed to enjoy it, and they were having fun, and Rebby was also there, and there were plenty of others. Senor Benjamin, that was actually pretty funny how he was there because he was just a Mexican gardener, but he also, it's almost like he looked like he would cut a bitch if need be. But even the Broken Universe was not the first example of cinematic wrestling. It was something that helped it out quite a bit, and took stuff from Lucha Underground. But let's go all the way back. Let's go all the way back to the 80s. Because you could even go back to the 70s of Memphis when Jerry Jarrett was trying to push Jerry Lawler. And they were doing, cinematic stuff and everything, and ahead of their time as far as technology and stuff like that. And some wrestling companies were getting more into the rock and roll stuff and everything, and they were doing profile stuff. And they were doing, maybe where they would get in fights when Dusty got beat up by the Horsemen, and they broke his arm, and he had that cast forever, not as long as Bob Orton Jr. did, but I digress. There were a lot of stuff where they were doing cinematic stuff like that, and that one was more like it was shot like it was going to be a freaking snuff film. Fortunately, nobody died. In that video, at least. R.I.P. Dusty Rhodes. That was a death that hit me hard, and I think hit us all hard. So, cinematic wrestling. There's no real one way to figure out when they started doing this and when the whole movie stuff went on. Dusty was obviously somebody that enjoyed making movies. Or at least, making cinematic stuff. He's not the first, but he was one that helped popularize it. The Jimmy Valiant on the Street, how the Boogie Woogie Man got born, and that feud that he went in with Paul Jones during the Crockett Promotions, which went on for a long goddamn time. But first, he was down on his luck, and then he rose back up, and then he lost everything again, and he had to get back on it. And Jimmy Valiant really, really over. He was really over in the Carolinas, in surrounding areas. But then you got the Chamber of Horrors. You got that match that was, where they lowered, because that's an example of a match where they tried to be cinematic with it as far as, the concept of it. You had to lower an electric chair in there, and it was all Halloween themed and shit like that, and they had to have somebody fried in an electric chair, and that's how you won. You killed one of your opponents, and it was Abdul the Butcher. Known piece of shit that he is, lied about the whole thing with Bruiser Brody. Oh boy. You ever see that Bruiser Brody Dark Side of the Ring episode? God, it's a good thing I didn't review that, because I was ready to go. I was ready to go absolutely insane over Abdullah. But that's an example of something cinematic, even though it was shot with a lot of cameras and everything, and it was shot in front of a crowd. The White Castle of Fear. The White Castle of Fear, that whole thing where, good God, it was Vader and Sting, and they were in this weird mountainy area, and it was so fucking bizarre. It made no goddamn sense. But it was a hell of a match. It was a great way to build up the feud, because they had an incredible feud in 1992, at Great American Bash 92, and then Starrcade 92, and then other they'd had great matches before, during that time too, I'm sure, but those are the ones that stick out in my mind. And then they would have great matches even in 94. And the Super Brawl 3, Super Brawl 93, that was Super Brawl 3. That was that was like a, a mini movie and stuff like that. That was another one of Dusty's visions where he just wanted to make movies. He wanted to have a whole lot of fun. Beach Blast 93, I believe, is the one that featured like this boat explosion where like a midget blew up a boat and nobody knew what the hell was going on. Nobody knew at all what was happening. And WWE wasn't really, they were doing personality profiles and stuff like that, but they weren't doing anything terribly cinematic, mainly because Vince McMahon was kind of falling on his ass financially. And Dusty was doing his stuff in WCW, and yes, there's other stuff. I'm not going to go over everything minute detail, but I'm going to give some examples. That was like making mini movies, but those weren't necessarily matches. What was advertised as a match was something like, say, Halloween Havoc 95, with a giant in a monster truck and Hulk Hogan in a monster truck, and they were welded together, and they were trying to push each other out of the circle on top of either the Joe Louis Arena or, I think it was the Joe Louis Arena. I know somebody told me at one point where it was at, and I totally forgot, so I apologize to you. I didn't read your comment, but a lot of shit going on in here. But that was advertised as a pseudo match, so to speak, even though it was just a monster truck thing. So that was doing something outside of the realm. But they were putting money into it to like say, hey, we're making movies. We're not just being wrestling. We're being entertainment. And it was really shit. If you saw the monster truck thing, it was absolute shit. And then the giant falls off and then comes back. It falls off into a lake, falls out the building into like a river or a lake or something, and then comes back and is not wet at all, and then beats Hulk Hogan while the Yeti was doing the double penetration thing. Yes, that was something that actually happened. Halloween Havoc 1995. You're welcome. You will hate me when you watch it. I hate myself for even reminding myself of it. But it is what it is. I could take those things out of my head, but no, I don't have any hard objects right next to me. So you know what, piece of paper? Nah, that didn't necessarily work. Wait, let me see. Yeah, there we go. There we go. That sort of worked. But yeah, the monster truck thing, that was stupid. They were doing other things. WCW was gaining some momentum, and WWE responded by going Mania 12 with Piper and Goldust, the Hollywood Backlot Brawl, which was different than a lot of stuff they had been doing at that point. They did, because empty arena matches, boot camp matches, empty arena matches happened. Jerry Lawler, Terry Funk, and others had happened. Impact ended up doing a great one between Angle and Sting a number of years later. That wasn't so much cinematic, that was just more of a brawl. But the Piper Goldust Hollywood Backlot Brawl was intense, especially for that time, because they didn't want to show blood. They didn't want to show a lot. And I believe it was Goldust that was bleeding, and they did the whole thing with OJ and the footage and stuff like that, and that was uncomfortable. But that was apparently filmed days before WrestleMania 12. And then they fought like they were all covered in dirt and everything, or all covered in grime or makeup and that kind of stuff. And it was supposed to be like they had fought from there, and that was live, and then they fought to the arena. They drove to the arena, and then Goldust got the shit beat out of him, and they wrestled in front of a live crowd. But still, that was one of the early examples in WWE of cinematic wrestling. And then you get to something just a little bit later that year. SummerSlam 96. Boiler Room Brawl. Taker and Mankind doing the stuff where it was like a one-camera shoot or a two-camera shoot. And it was that was more like a snuff film, the way they were attacking. And actually, there were some pretty chilling moments in that. Taker looking around for Mankind sneaking up behind him and attacking him, and doing the stuff that they did. Mankind taking an incredible bump off, like, a ladder. He got thrown through a frickin', he got just like thrown on the concrete, well, into some stuff, but on the concrete, because Foley just didn't give a shit. Probably should have, because fucking hell, he beat his body up like crazy. But then, speaking of Mick Foley, you go all the way back to 1993. You go with the Lost in Cleveland stuff. After Cactus Jack had been, powerbombed by Vader, he lost his memory. He was lost in Cleveland. He was just among all the street people. It was like they were doing the same thing trying to do the same for him that they did for Jimmy Valiant, that Dusty had done for Jimmy Valiant a number of years before. Doing all that stuff with the Boogie Woogie Man, and Foley was like lost, his Cactus Jack, he was totally lost. And then eventually they just dropped it because they were like, this is stupid. Let's get back to him wrestling. And then he faced Vader in a really brutal Texas death match at Halloween Havoc 93. But a Lost in Cleveland stuff was silly. Then we had the Boiler Room Brawl, which was intense. And yes, it was kind of the same thing of the Hollywood Backlot Brawl. They fought in this unique setting, and then they would fight to the ring. And then you go with something like the Empty Arena match, which was pre-taped before. It was an empty arena. It was shown during halftime. It was halftime heat. Rock versus Mankind. It was the week at, well, it was advertised as the week after the Rumble, but I think it was taped like days before. And it was silly because it was comedic, like, and they had, like, you know, the multiple camera shots of the forklift, you know, with the pallet going on top of Rock to pin him down. But they had stuff like, you know, the Socko getting thrown in the oven, them fighting in the empty arena, and multiple shoots and stuff like that. And yes, it was just another empty arena match, but they almost made that one cinematic with how they did silly camera shots and a lot of the silliness and the goofiness. But that was an early example of pseudo-cinematic wrestling. But what really kicked off, and this is talking about, you know, the pros and cons of it, and I'll actually get to that here in a bit, but I'm giving some examples. So actually, let's go just right there, pros and cons of it. The pro is that you can do a whole bunch of different shit, and you can have the wrestlers act stuff out, and you can make it cool, you can make it dramatic, and you can add some cool effects. And that is nice. Here are the cons. It's not wrestling. Cinematic wrestling ain't wrestling. It's entertainment, and it can be something, you know, that can entertain people, and it can present wrestling in a different light, but it's not wrestling. And I know that that sounds like I'm being a purist, and I'm probably going to get absolutely fucking shredded in the comments, but when you present something as something other than a wrestling match, I hate to say it, it is not wrestling. Yes, Buried Alive, you could argue with that. That was a silly gimmick, but that wasn't really a cinematic one. As cinematic as it was to see Vince get his head busted open in Survivor Series 03, but I digress. The pros are, again, you can make stuff look cool, and you can make stuff look unique. And it can look polished and everything, and it can present wrestling differently. And there, you know, it could get certain people over, and you can tweak with some, you know, tweak some gimmicks. You can tweak them all around and everything. You can tweak them until they're all perky. I'm going to keep saying tweak until you are uncomfortable or you think of the South Park character, if you're too jacked up on caffeine like I am. Anyway, with this, you know, the cons, though, again, it's not wrestling. And sometimes it doesn't work all that well. So let's go with the biggest one. And this is the biggest influencer. And I'm not even saying that Matt stole from this, but the concept of it, as far as like Jeremy Borash working with him, one of the first wrestling companies in the modern age to use cinematic wrestling. Impact did some weird stuff. They had Smojo being captured by ninjas. That wasn't wrestling nor cinematic. It was stupid because it was Russo, or it was whoever the fuck it was. But every company has tried different things to try and push the boundaries. Lucha Underground, that was on El Rey for a while, and I don't think it's ever going to have another season. Kind of thank God with the way they fuck people over with their contracts. Got to meet Thunder Rosa, though, at an indie show a couple years ago, about a year and a half ago. That was really goddamn cool. You know, she was Cobra Moon in Lucha Underground. Great, and has really put in the work and has worked extremely hard. Okay, enough praising Thunder Rosa, though I could do that all day. She is a great talent. Get a chance to meet her at shows once indie wrestling comes back. Please make sure to meet her. She's really, really cool and great in the ring. So, Lucha Underground, though, did a lot of, like, you know, presenting, it's like this overarching thing of Dario Cueto, who, I forget the guy's actual name. That might be his name, but I know he was in a really, really bad Creature feature in 2011 that might have actually been called Creature now that I think about it. But he was like this guy, just a brief history. He was a guy that controlled the temple, the Lucha Underground temple, and had wrestlers fight, and he would bring people in, like, you know, he'd bring in a family member, Matanza, who was Jeff Cobb under a goddamn mask, a guy that ate people. Seriously. They had people being eaten, and they had people being killed, and they had stuff going on backstage, like Pentagon Jr. and Vampiro being a, you know, master-disciple thing. And sometimes there were times where the cinematic stuff and how well it was shot and the stunt work actually worked pretty well. Here's the problem. It didn't always work, and it got old. It was fine on occasion. It was fine, you know, here and there. Not once an episode, but presenting the stuff backstage where people were talking and it was this multi-camera shoot, beautifully shot and all that, and it was like that. Presenting the promos like where people were talking about their matches or talking about stuff they were going to do, okay, I could buy that. But the stuff where you had people either breaking out to jail or you had people doing the stuff where they were, you know, this character got kidnapped or this character got beat up, and that's why we weren't going to see them this week. It got to where it got watered down. But by the end of Season 2, I was over it. Now, I saw some of Season 3. Season 3 is where it started to kind of have some issues, even though there's some great talent. Killshot is Shane Swerve Strickland, who's Isaiah Swerve Scott now, but He will always be Shane Swerve Strickland to me. Got to meet him. Great guy. He wrestled in the Indies, and now he's succeeding in WWE. He's getting to live his dream and really work hard. There were some good talents that they had there, but they jumped the shark. With Season 1, it was great. Season 2, they really started to get out of control with the goddamn cinematics and all that stuff. And then it got to where it just got stupid. I mean, I saw some of Season 4, and I fucking hated it, and I couldn't finish Season 4. But Lucha Underground kind of set the groundwork for how this stuff would happen. Then you get to the Broken Universe, Final Deletion, and all that happened in Impact. Now, I feel two ways about the stuff with Broken Matt Hardy. It was a great gimmick then, 2016. It's 2020 now, and I'm over that gimmick. Now, I follow Matt Hardy on Twitter. I got nothing against Matt Hardy. I got nothing but love for the guy. He's worked hard, and he's doing his best, and he believes in this character, and credit to him for doing that. He goes all in on this character, and he believes it. And that's fine. And that's great. I didn't necessarily care for a lot of the Broken Universe stuff, the whole delete thing. But it got him attention. It got Jeff Hardy attention. It, unfortunately, led to Rebby being on TV. That's another story for another day. But it led to a rebirth, so to speak, of the Hardys. They could no longer be the Hardy Boys because they were in their, they were in their 40s at that point. Well, Jeff was almost in his 40s, and Matt was in his early 40s. You have to find a way to stay relevant and change things up, and that's what the Broken gimmick did. But it had a short shelf life. I didn't care for the Final Deletion, the Burning Cross and all that stuff and everything, the Dilapidated Boat. There were a lot of memes that got born out of it, and that worked pretty well. But some of the fucking shit that was happening, I was like, okay, now I'm over this. They did do the stuff with, I believe it was Abyss and Crazy Steve, and I believe Rosemary was there also. It was at Bound for Glory 2016, because that was the last Bound for Glory the Hardys were part of, because they would leave in like late February, early March when their contracts were up, and then have that shocking return at WrestleMania 33. The shocking return that everybody knew was going to happen and still lost their shit over. And then we remembered why it was a good thing that maybe the Hardys weren't around all that much, because working that WWE schedule, ho dear. But the whole point of this Final Deletion, Ultimate Deletion stuff, it worked. It did. It worked. I give them credit for that. Even if I didn't care for it, it got the proper attention. What really kind of made me laugh, though, was New Day versus the Wyatts at the Wyatt compound. Remember that? Remember shortly after the Ultimate, or, the Final Deletion stuff happened? Remember how they had it where Bray was going to, make Xavier Woods do stuff? He had him in trance, like he was going to, capture him. He was going to take him. He was going to suck his blood. He was going to skin him alive like Buffalo Bill. I don't know what he was going to do. Make him join his cult? Break up the New Day? Would have been weird. They didn't go anywhere with it. But they met the Wyatts at their compound. And it was, the instant I saw this, I go, okay. Now you can say Impact ripped off some of WWE, talents or otherwise, and whatever. And that's fair, because they did. WWE totally ripped that off right there. Something that was fresh, at least, if you didn't watch Lucha Underground. Matt Hardy put his own tweak on and everything. And what was WWE do? They take the cinematic look of it, except it looked like it was filmed through a freaking, a mud field, and probably filmed in a mud field, but they put the camera in mud, caked it all over the freaking lens, and then nobody fucking believed it, because it was fucking stupid. And that's nothing against the talents, it was just fucking stupid. But then, we get to the House of Horrors, which was shortly after Matt and Jeff had returned. This was after Bray had lost to Orton for the WWE Championship. Bray Wyatt, former WWE Champion, for 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks. And it's a shame that they didn't have him keep it, because no, we need to give it to Jinder Mahal. That was a great idea. But the House of Horrors thing was stupid because, yes, it was campy, and yes, it was supposed to be dumb, but yeah, the dilapidated fridge, all that and everything, this house. And what made it even worse is they tried to do the same thing that they did with the, the Piper Goldust thing or the Boiler Room Brawl. Have them fight in this undisclosed location that's clearly pre-taped. and looks nice and everything, and they try to make it look like an old horror movie. And then they get in cars and they go back and then they beat each other up in the ring. And it just makes no goddamn sense. It's so fucking stupid. WWE had difficulty doing cinematic wrestling properly because they would just try to rip off what was going on, like in Impact, or, you know, say, hey, let's take the flavor of what Matt Hardy did, but just take all the flavor out, make it as vanilla as possible, as good as vanilla ice cream is, and I will fight anyone if they disagree, but let's not just put any passion into it. And nothing against Bray, and it's nothing against Orton. Well, actually, plenty against Orton because he dropped the N-word on Twitch, but no, he's not racist. No, he's not. He probably is, and people don't want to admit it. So, let's get to Mania 36. I'm not going to go in everything minute detail because I've already overshot the time that I was going to go, and also because I talked about these matches as well already. Edge versus Orton was too long. Yes, looked cool. Could have had 20 minutes cut out of it, and it wouldn't have been a miss. They made it cinematic looking, even though it was in the Performance Center, but it didn't work for me. It didn't work for me at all. But that was something that they had to do to try and dress up the fact that, oh yeah, we don't have anybody here, or, you know, we don't have any fans here, so let's just have the guys go out there and have a passion-filled match they could have done in half the fucking time. Boneyard match. Ridiculous. Probably one of the probably the best WrestleMania main event in history because it was so batshit insane and so ridiculous. I kid, it really was not very good. It wasn't a match because it wasn't wrestling, but it was entertaining. And at least that one, I guess, had a conclusive finish. Firefly Funhouse sure as fuck didn't from night 2. Well, it did and it didn't. I mean, Cena is now going to be the guy that's gone. Maybe he's gone forever. Hopefully he is gone forever. I don't really want to see John Cena come back. He should not win title number 17, which wouldn't beat Ric Flair's record, by the way, because Ric Flair actually has an unrecognized 20 to 22 world title reigns, possibly 24. And I will continue to say that because I will continue to move the goalposts further back because Cena doesn't deserve that accolade. And I'm not saying that Cena hasn't performed well. And I'm not saying Cena hasn't carried that brand for a long time. But let's be honest, Ric Flair won more titles than 16, and I'm going to say that. But Firefly Funhouse, that was cinematic and goofy, and I didn't care for it, and it also wasn't wrestling. Then we get to Ciampa versus Gargano, the final encounter. Please, for the love of fucking God. I thought Edge and Orton went on too long. This put me to sleep. I literally almost fell asleep watching this. And I think Gargano and Ciampa are two tremendous talents that can put on great goddamn matches. But you know what they can't do? Entertain me anymore. And this was fucking boring. Oh, let's turn Candice heel. Candice could be bad. Yeah, great. Okay. I mean, you had a chance to make Candice not Gargano's wife and have her actually be her own character. But not, let's just fuck that up and everything. Whew. So again, the pros and cons of cinematic wrestling are essentially that you can make it look cool and you can put, if you have the budget, you can make it work. But the cons are it's not fucking wrestling. And that's all I have to say about that. So those are my opinions. What other cinematic wrestling matches, vignettes, things did I forget? Let me know in the comments because there's a ton. I know I forgot a bunch. And I am sorry if I forgot any. I'm just scratching the surface on this thing, but that's going to be the end of the rant. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.